$6,500. That was the exact price tag my father refused to pay to save my leg from permanent disability. He looked me in the eye and told me he had just bought a boat called the Freedom and simply could not spare the cash. My mother sat next to him sipping her wine and told me that suffering was just a part of being an adult. My younger sister Jasmine laughed and suggested I sell my old laptop if I was that desperate. They stood there in their expensive clothes, mocking my pain, completely unaware of the reality of the situation. They had no idea that the daughter they were kicking out into the rain was secretly the owner of the holding company that possessed the mortgage on their house. They did not know that I could buy their precious boat, their cars, and their entire lifestyle with a single signature. Before I tell you how I turned their celebration into their worst nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who had to become a wolf to survive. My name is Keisha, and I am 35 years old. Up until 3 days ago, my family thought I was just a struggling data entry clerk living in a cramped apartment. The truth is, I made my first million in crypto 4 years ago and have been ghostwriting bestsellers for CEOs ever since. But I kept it hidden. I needed to know if they loved me or just what I could provide. Last Saturday, I got my answer in the most brutal way possible. It was the annual family barbecue at my parents' house. The air smelled of charcoal and expensive cologne. I was by the patio door when I saw my nephew Jasmine's 2-year-old son stumble toward the open basement stairs. Jasmine was too busy taking selfies to notice. I didn't think. I just lunged. I caught the boy midair and threw my weight backward to shield him. He landed safely on the soft carpet, but I went down hard. I heard the snap before I felt the pain. It sounded like a dry branch breaking in a winter forest. Then the agony ripped through my left knee, stealing my breath. I lay there at the bottom of the stairs, gasping, waiting for help. I heard footsteps thundering down, but they weren't coming for me. My mother stepped right over my twisted leg, rushing to scoop up the crying baby who didn't have a single scratch on him. "Oh, thank God, you are okay," she cooed to the child, turning her back to me. My father appeared at the top of the stairs, looking annoyed rather than worried. "Keisha," he shouted down, "why do you always have to cause a scene? Can you not go one family gathering without being clumsy?" I tried to speak to tell him I couldn't move, but the room was spinning. No one offered a hand. No one called an ambulance. I had to drag myself to my car and drive to the emergency room alone, using my right foot to work the pedals while tears streamed down my face. The doctor told me I had a grade 3 meniscus tear. Surgery was mandatory, and because my insurance had a high deductible, I needed $6,500 up front. I sat in that cold hospital room looking at my bank app on my decoy phone, which showed only $100, and realized I had to do the one thing I promised myself I never would. I had to go back to them and beg. The sterile smell of the emergency room burned my nostrils. It was a sharp shift from the aroma of grilled steak I had left behind at my parents' house. I sat on the paper-covered exam table, shivering in my wet clothes, while Dr. Henderson pointed at the gray and white images on the lightbox. His voice was professional, but devoid of warmth. "You have a bucket handle tear of the medial meniscus grade 3. The cartilage has flipped over and is locking the joint. If we do not operate within 7 days, the damage will become permanent, and you will likely walk with a cane for the rest of your life." The room spun slightly. Permanent disability at 35. I told him to book the surgery. I just wanted the pain to stop. That was when the hospital billing coordinator stepped in. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Ms. Jenkins," she said softly, "we checked your insurance. You have a high deductible plan, and you haven't met the threshold for this year. We require a deposit of $6,500 before we can schedule the procedure. $6,500. To the family I just left, that was the price of a weekend getaway or a few bottles of vintage wine. To the person they thought I was, it was an impossible sum." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my battered Android phone with the cracked screen. My hands were shaking, not from cold but from rage. I opened my checking account app. The balance stared back at me in mocking red numbers. $120.14. This was the narrative my family knew. Poor Keisha. Struggling Keisha. The disappointment of the family. But inside the lining of my purse sat a second phone, an encrypted black device linked to a secure banking portal in Switzerland. If I logged in right now, I would see a balance of over $3.2 million. I could buy this hospital wing if I wanted to. I could swipe my black card and have the surgery tonight in a VIP suite. My thumb hovered over the zipper of my purse. It would be so easy to just fix this myself, to remain independent. But a dark thought took root in my mind. If I saved myself now, I would never truly know. I would never know if my father loved me enough to sacrifice a fraction of his luxury for my health. I would never know if my mother would choose her daughter over her pride. This was it. The final exam. I decided to keep the millions hidden for one more day. I would go back to them as a beggar. If they helped me, I would share my fortune with them forever. If they turned me away, I would destroy them. I looked up at the coordinator and told her I would get the money. I grabbed my crutches and limped toward the exit, ready to face the wolves one last time. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. My knee throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that seemed to sync with the windshield wipers slapping against the glass. A light freezing rain had started to fall, turning the streets of Chicago into slick mirrors reflecting the city lights. When I finally turned onto the street of the family estate, I saw that the driveway was already overflowing with luxury vehicles. There were Mercedes SUVs, BMW sedans, and even a red Porsche that I recognized as belonging to one of my father's golf buddies. I had to park my beat-up sedan 3 houses down and navigate the icy sidewalk on crutches. The air was thick with the smell of money. I could smell charcoal, grilled lobster tails, and garlic butter wafting from the backyard, even from the street. It made my stomach turn. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but the nausea wasn't from hunger. It was from the dread of what I was about to do. Getting up the front walkway was a humiliating ordeal. The slate stones were wet and slippery, and twice my crutch slid out from under me, forcing me to catch myself on the freezing brick wall. Inside, the house sounded alive. The smooth notes of a live jazz saxophone drifted through the windows, accompanied by the roar of laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. It sounded warm. It sounded inviting. It sounded like a world I had been exiled from. I reached the massive oak double doors and pressed the doorbell. I waited. Nothing happened. The party was too loud. I pressed it again, holding my finger down a little longer this time. Still nothing. My leg was screaming at me now, the pain radiating up my thigh. I leaned my entire weight against the doorframe and rang a third time, pounding on the wood with my free hand. Finally, the lock clicked. The lock. The door swung open, revealing my mother, Beatrice. She looked impeccable in a shimmering gold silk dress that probably cost $3,000. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and she held a flute of champagne in one hand. But the moment she saw me, her smile vanished. It was replaced by a look of sheer annoyance, as if I were a solicitor trying to sell her something she didn't want. "Keisha," she hissed, her voice low and sharp, "you are over an hour late. We have already started the toasts, and your father is in a mood." She didn't ask why I was late. She didn't ask why I was soaked from the rain. Her eyes traveled down my body and stopped at my leg. Her lip curled in genuine disgust. "And look at you. That cast is absolutely hideous. It is dirty and bulky. We have the vice president of the bank inside, and you look like you just crawled out of a gutter. Can you not simply wear something elegant for once?" I tried to speak to tell her that I had just come from the emergency room, but she turned her back on me before I could get a word out. "Just come inside and try to hide that unsightly thing under the table. Do not embarrass us tonight, Keisha." She walked away, leaving the door open for me to struggle through alone. I took a deep breath, gripped the handles of my crutches until my knuckles turned white, and stepped into the house that never felt like home. I hobbled into the formal dining room, where the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and roasted garlic. My father, Calvin, was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, holding a large, intricate model of a yacht. He was beaming with pride, pointing out the miniature teak decks and the gold-plated lettering on the hull to a captive audience of relatives and business partners. He looked up as I entered, but his smile did not reach his eyes. He simply gestured for me to take the small folding chair that had been set up in the corner away from the main table. It was the kind of seat you give to an unexpected child or hired help. I sat down awkwardly, trying to stretch my throbbing leg out without tripping anyone. I waited for a break in the conversation about horsepower and marina fees before I gathered every ounce of courage I had left. "Dad, Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I am sorry to interrupt the celebration, but I need to talk to you about something urgent." The chatter around the table died down slowly. My father set the model boat down on the sideboard with excessive care before turning to face me. He looked annoyed that the spotlight had shifted. "What is it, Keisha?" he asked, checking his gold Rolex. "We are about to cut the cake." I took a deep breath and gripped the edge of the flimsy chair. I explained about the fall. I explained about the torn meniscus and the doctor saying I could lose mobility permanently without the operation. I told them about the insurance deductible and the deadline. "I need to borrow $6,500, I said, forcing myself to look him in the eye. "I know it is a lot to ask, but I have nowhere else to go. I will pay you back every cent plus 10% interest within 6 months. I just need to walk again." The silence that followed was suffocating. It felt heavy and physical, pressing down on my chest. The only sound in the room was the scrape of a silver fork against fine china as my sister Jasmine casually took a bite of her lobster. Everyone else froze. My aunt looked down at her plate. Greg, my brother-in-law, took a sip of wine with a smirk playing on his lips. My parents exchanged a look that I knew all too well. It was a look of shared burden, a look that said, "Here she goes again being a problem." They looked at me not with concern for my injury, but with the kind of irritation one feels when a beggar approaches them on the street. I sat there exposed and humiliated, offering to pay interest to my own parents for the privilege of not being crippled while surrounded by people wearing jewelry that cost 3 times the amount I was asking for. It was the longest 10 seconds of my life, waiting for a verdict I already felt in the pit of my stomach. My father stared at me for a moment before he slowly lowered his wine glass to the table. The sharp click of the crystal against the wood echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. He did not look guilty. He looked inconvenienced. He picked up a linen napkin and dabbed the corner of his mouth before sighing deeply. "Keisha," he began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when lecturing his employees. "You have always had a flair for the dramatic, but you need to understand the reality of our finances. We are not a bank, we have our own commitments." He gestured grandly toward the model ship sitting on the sideboard. "That vessel represents a lifetime of hard work. It is called the Freedom. Just this morning I wired a non-refundable deposit of $45,000 to the broker in Miami. That money is gone, Keisha, locked in. I cannot simply recall a wire transfer because you were careless on a staircase." The logic was suffocating. He had $45,000 for a boat he would use maybe twice a year, but not $6,000 for his daughter's surgery. I felt tears pricking my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer injustice of it. "But Dad," I whispered, "it is my leg. If I do not get this surgery, I might never walk properly again." He cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Stop it. Just stop right there. You are 35 years old, Keisha. 35. Be an adult. When I was your age, I had already bought my first 2 properties and was raising a family. You are still running home to mommy and daddy every time life gets a little hard. First it was tuition years ago, then it was that car repair, and now this. You need to learn to manage your own risks. If you do not have an emergency fund at your age, that is a failure of character, not a family emergency. Don't sit there and look at me like a victim. The world doesn't owe you a safety net just because you share my last name." I sat stunned. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was lecturing me about finance while unknowingly sitting on a mortgage that was 3 months delinquent. He was talking about risk management while spending his last liquid cash on a boat he couldn't afford. He told me to be an adult, but he was the one playing make-believe with money he didn't really have. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my phone and show him my 7-figure balance. I wanted to tell him that I could buy his precious freedom boat and sink it just for fun, but I bit my tongue. I needed to see how far this rot went. I needed to see if anyone at this table had a soul. My father's refusal was the signal the rest of the table had been waiting for. It was open season on Keisha. Jasmine wiped a speck of butter from her lip with a linen napkin and leaned forward, her bracelets jingling with a sound that irritated my headache. "You know, Keisha," she said with a fake sweetness that was worse than shouting. "Dad is right. You really need to learn how to liquidate assets in an emergency. Why don't you sell that heavy laptop you are always lugging around, the one you are always typing on in the corner at parties?" I stayed silent, gripping my crutches. She was talking about my Alienware workstation, the tool I used to manage a multi-million-dollar empire. To her, it was just an old computer. She let out a cruel giggle. "Oh wait, I forgot. That thing is a brick. You probably could not even give it away. Maybe a museum would take it." Greg snickered beside her. He swirled his Cabernet and looked at me with pity in his eyes. "Hey, tech recycling pays by the pound, Keisha. You might get $10 for it. Enough for a cab ride home, at least." The table erupted in polite laughter. My face burned. I wasn't embarrassed for myself, I was embarrassed for them. They had no idea that the laptop they were mocking held the keys to their financial destruction. But the worst blow didn't come from my siblings. It came from my mother. Beatrice placed her hand over Greg's, making a show of affection. "That is enough teasing," she said. But her voice lacked any real reprimand. "However, Keisha, this is a lesson in financial literacy. You have never been good with money. You live paycheck to paycheck because you lack vision. Look at your sister. Look at Greg." She gestured toward the driveway visible through the bay window. "Greg just bought Jasmine that brand new Range Rover for her birthday, a customized autobiography edition. He did not come asking us for a handout because he is a provider. He understands how to manage wealth." I looked out at the white SUV shining under the street lamps. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. I knew something they didn't. As a majority shareholder in the bank Greg used, I knew that car wasn't bought. It was leased. And not just leased, but secured with a subprime loan because Greg's credit score was hovering in the high 500s. He was paying an interest rate that bordered on criminal just to keep up appearances. He was drowning in bad debt to look rich, while I was drowning in liquid cash, but looked poor. My mother continued, unaware of the irony. "Maybe if you focused less on your little typing hobby and found a real career like Greg, you would have a husband to take care of you too, instead of burdening us with your clumsiness." The hypocrisy was physically painful. I realized then that there was no love here, only a scoreboard, and I was about to change the game. Greg decided it was his turn to kick the dog while it was down. He stood up from the table, slowly adjusting his silk tie, and walked over to the corner where I was sitting. He held a lit cigar in one hand, and his wineglass in the other, looming over me like a feudal lord inspecting a peasant. He looked down at my cast with a performative frown that was dripping with fake sympathy. "You know, Keisha," he said loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, "I hate to see families struggling like this. It really pulls at the heartstrings." He took a slow sip of his wine, letting the tension build before continuing. "I might actually have a solution for you. My logistics company is currently looking to expand our maintenance team. Specifically, we have an opening for the night shift custodial staff. It is $15 an hour. Now I know it is not glamorous work. You would be scrubbing the warehouse toilets and emptying the trash bins after the executives go home. But if you really apply yourself and pick up some overtime, you could probably scrape together that $6,000 in about 3 or 4 months. Of course, you would have to hobble around on one leg to do it, but hey, beggars cannot be choosers, right?" He grinned, revealing his teeth, which were slightly stained from the wine. Then he took a long drag from his cigar and leaned in close. He pursed his lips and blew a thick cloud of acrid gray smoke directly into my face. I coughed, waving the toxic fumes away while he chuckled softly as if he had just told the funniest joke in the world. Around the table, my parents did not scold him. My sister Jasmine giggled behind her hand. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the wood of my crutches. The urge to swing the heavy timber across his smug jaw was almost overpowering. My heart hammered against my ribs not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. I looked up at him, this man who thought he was a titan of industry. He had no idea who he was talking to. As a silent investor with a diversified portfolio, I had recently acquired a 15% stake in the very logistics firm he worked for. I had seen the internal audit reports. I knew about the doctored expense accounts. I knew about the mysterious business trips to Las Vegas that coincided with his gambling debts. He was standing on a trapdoor that I was holding the lever for, and he was too busy looking down on me to notice the ground was about to open up. I forced myself to unclench my jaw and stared straight into his eyes. "Thank you for the generous offer, Greg," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I will keep that in mind." He laughed again, patting me on the head like a dog, before turning back to the table, oblivious to the fact that he had just sealed his own fate. I opened my mouth to respond to Greg to tell him exactly where he could stick his mop bucket, but my father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "That is enough," he barked. He was not looking at Greg. He was looking at me with a mixture of exhaustion and disdain. "Keisha, just go home. You are ruining the vibe. People are trying to enjoy their champagne and celebrate my success, and you are bringing everyone down with your gloom and your poverty. Frankly, the smell of antiseptic coming off you is making your mother nauseous." I froze. I had not showered since the fall because I physically could not stand up in my shower, but I certainly did not smell. It was just a cruel excuse to get the broken thing out of sight. My father did not wait for me to argue. He walked around the table and firmly guided me by the elbow toward the front door. It was not quite a shove, but it was definitely an eviction. I struggled to keep my balance on my crutches, my rubber tips slipping on the polished marble of the foyer. Behind me, the jazz music swelled back up as if to drown out my existence. He opened the heavy oak door and the wind hit me like a physical blow. The light rain from earlier had turned into a slushy mix of ice and wet snow that stung my face. "Drive safe," he muttered without any real concern, his eyes already wandering back toward the party. Then he closed the door. The heavy thud of the latch clicking into place felt like the final period at the end of a sentence. I stood there on the porch, shivering violently as the freezing dampness seeped through my thin jacket. Through the frosted glass inserts of the door, I could see the golden glow of the chandelier. I saw the silhouette of my mother laughing at something Greg said. They had already forgotten me. I was just a minor interruption in their perfect evening. I turned around and faced the dark driveway. The cold was biting, but it was nothing compared to the ice in my heart. I began the long, painful trek back to my car, slipping on the wet pavement, with every step, knowing that I would never walk through that door as their daughter ever again. I sat in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan, listening to the sleet hammer against the roof, like a handful of gravel thrown by an angry god. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white, but I couldn't feel them. The physical pain in my knee was throbbing in time with my heartbeat, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. I looked at the front door of the house I had just been exiled from. The warm glow of the porch light seemed to mock me. It was the same porch where I had stood 5 years ago, handing my father a check that saved his life. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I closed my eyes, and I was back there standing in the kitchen in 2019. My mother was weeping at the table, clutching a foreclosure notice from the county. They owed $20,000 in back property taxes, and the sheriff was scheduled to auction the house in 3 days. I was 29, then working 2 jobs, and saving every penny for a down payment on a small condo. It was my dream to finally move out of the city rentals and own something of my own. But seeing my father look so defeated broke me. Without hesitation, I went to the bank and liquidated my entire life savings. I handed over the cashier's check for $20,000. I remember the way my mother hugged me. She cried into my shoulder and called me her angel. My father shook my hand with tears in his eyes and told me I was the only one he could count on. He said I was the backbone of this family. Now sitting in the dark with a broken leg and a broken heart, the bitterness tasted like bile in my throat. That $20,000 was never paid back. I never bought my condo. I had to start over from zero while they kept their house and their pride. And tonight, when I needed a fraction of that help, they looked at me with disgust. They didn't see the daughter who saved them. They only saw a liability. I realized then that their love was transactional. As long as I was the one giving, I was family. The moment I needed to receive, I was a stranger. I wiped the angry tears from my face and turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. I shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the house and the lie behind me. I wasn't the backbone of the family anymore. I was done carrying them. The climb to my third-floor apartment felt less like walking and more like mountaineering with a broken limb. My building did not have an elevator, which was one of the reasons the rent was so cheap. It was part of the charade I had maintained for 5 years. I wanted them to think I was struggling, so I lived in a place that smelled of boiled cabbage and old carpet. I finally unlocked my door and collapsed onto the lumpy beige sofa, dragging my throbbing leg up onto the cushions. I reached for the bottle of over-the-counter pain relievers on the coffee table and dry swallowed 3 of them. They would barely touch the agony radiating from my knee, but they were all I had. The silence in the apartment was heavy. It was a sharp contrast to the jazz music and laughter I had just been kicked out of. I lay there staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering if anyone would even notice if I simply vanished. Just then, my phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. A small spark of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe it was my father calling to apologize. Maybe my mother had felt a pang of guilt and wanted to see if I made it home safely through the ice storm. I picked up the cracked Android phone and the screen lit up. It was a notification from the family group chat named Jenkins Family Joy. It was not a text asking if I was okay. It was a photo. I opened the image and felt the air leave my lungs. It was a selfie taken by Jasmine. The entire family was squeezed into the frame, smiling broadly. My father was holding his wine glass high, his face flushed with triumph. My mother was leaning into him, looking adoringly at the model of the boat, the Freedom, which sat in the center of the table like a holy relic. Greg had his arm draped casually around Jasmine, both of them beaming with the satisfaction of people who had won. Even my aunt and uncle were in the background clapping. But it was the caption that shattered me. Underneath the picture of their happy faces, Jasmine had written, "Family is everything. So blessed to start this new chapter together. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag new boat." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Family is everything. The irony was so sharp it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was their daughter. I was their sister. And I was currently lying alone in the dark in severe pain, less than an hour after begging them for help. Yet, in their version of reality, family was everything only as long as everyone played their part and didn't ask for money. I was not in the picture. I was not in the caption. To them, I was already erased. I zoomed in on my father's face. He didn't look worried about his injured child. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had successfully taken out the trash so he could enjoy his party. I typed a reply. "I am in so much pain." Then I deleted it. I typed another one. "How could you post this? I deleted that too. Why should I give them the satisfaction of knowing they hurt me?" I tossed the phone to the other end of the couch. The sadness that had been weighing me down began to evaporate. In its place, a cold, hard resolve began to settle in my bones. They wanted to live in a fantasy world where they were rich and righteous. Fine. I was about to wake them up. The silence in the apartment following the group chat notification was deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that amplified the throbbing in my swollen knee. I tossed the cracked Android phone onto the cushion beside me and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. They thought I was destitute. They thought I was lying here helpless and broken, waiting for a handout that would never come. The anger in my chest began to cool, hardening into something sharper and more dangerous. I needed to remind myself of who I really was. I needed to see the truth that made their little boat and their leased cars look like toys. I gritted my teeth and forced myself upright. Every movement sent a fresh spike of fire up my leg, but I ignored it. I grabbed my crutches and dragged myself across the worn beige carpet to the far wall, where a cheap reproduction of a generic landscape painting hung slightly crooked. To any burglar or visitor, it was just a piece of garage sale junk worth less than $5. I reached behind the frame and pressed a hidden latch. The painting swung outward, revealing a sleek biometric safe embedded flush with the drywall. This was the only expensive thing in the entire apartment, and it was the only thing that mattered. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A soft green light pulsed, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside there were no stacks of cash or jewelry. There was only a matte black Alienware laptop and a small leather-bound ledger. I pulled the computer out and sat on the floor, leaning my back against the wall. The machine hummed to life instantly, the backlit keyboard glowing a menacing red. This was my command center. This was where Keisha, the struggling data clerk, died, and Keisha Jenkins, the silent magnate, came to life. I navigated to my secure banking portal, routing the connection through a VPN in Zurich. My fingers flew across the keys, typing in a password string that I had memorized years ago. The screen refreshed, and there it was. The number that defined my secret life: $3,214,560.42. The green digits glowed against the dark background, illuminating my face in the dim room. I stared at the balance, letting the reality of it wash over me. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was power. I could transfer the funds for my surgery right now and have a private medical team at my door in an hour. I could buy the marina where my father kept his precious boat and evict him just for sport. I could buy the bank that held the mortgage on my parents' house and foreclose on them tomorrow. I had the power to crush them or save them with a single click. But as I looked at the zeros, I realized something painful. I could buy their debt, but I could not buy their decency. I could pay for their lifestyle, but I could not pay them to love me. If I used this money now to save myself, I would never know if they were capable of caring for me without a price tag attached. I needed to finish the test. I closed the laptop and locked it back in the safe just as my phone began to buzz again on the couch. This time it wasn't a notification. It was a call. I slid my thumb across the cracked screen to answer the video call. Dante's face filled the frame immediately. The connection was a little grainy, but I could see the dark smudges of motor oil on his forehead and cheeks. He was wearing his gray mechanic's jumpsuit, the one with his name stitched in red over the pocket. The collar was stained with sweat and grease. Behind him, I could hear the high-pitched whine of a pneumatic drill and the clanging of metal against metal. He was clearly sitting in the break room of the auto repair shop under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Hey, Keisha," he said, his voice loud over the background noise. "I am so glad you picked up. I have been texting you for 20 minutes. Are you okay? Mom told me you left the party early because you had a migraine or something. She said you did not want to ruin the toast, so you slipped out the back." I felt a fresh wave of nausea hit me. Of course that was their narrative. They could not admit to their guests or their son that they had thrown their injured daughter out into the snow like unwanted garbage. They had to spin it. They had to make themselves look benevolent, and me look fragile. I gripped the phone tighter, fighting the urge to tell him the truth right then and there. I wanted to scream that they were liars, that Dad had told me to grow up while refusing to help me walk again. But looking at Dante's tired, kind eyes, I couldn't do it. He was the only innocent person in this entire mess. "Yeah, Dante," I lied, forcing my voice to remain steady. My leg was just throbbing, and I felt a little sick. I just needed to lay down. I didn't want to make a scene. Dante sighed, rubbing his face with a rag that looked dirtier than his hands. Man, I hate that I missed you. I am pulling a double shift tonight. One of the other guys called out sick again, so the boss asked me to stay until closing. I really need the overtime pay, you know. Sarah and I are trying to save up for the deposit on that venue for the wedding, but everything is so expensive. My heart broke for him. Here was my little brother working himself to the bone 16 hours a day to pay for a wedding while our father dropped 45 grand on a boat without blinking. Dante was the hardest worker I knew, yet he was treated like the black sheep just because he worked with his hands instead of in an office. Listen, he continued, leaning closer to the camera. I get off at 6 in the morning. I am going to swing by and pick up Sarah, and we are coming over to your place. We are bringing breakfast. Do not say no, Keisha. I know you. When you are hurt, you isolate yourself. I want to see that leg for myself. I tried to protest to tell him to go home and sleep, but he was already shaking his head. No arguments. See you in the morning. Love you, sis. The screen went black before I could say another word. I stared at the phone, realizing that while my parents had abandoned me, I wasn't entirely alone. And that made me even more determined to execute my plan. Not just for me, but for him. It was just past 11 at night when a soft knock echoed through my silent apartment. It was not the aggressive pounding of a landlord looking for rent or the polite rap of a delivery driver, but a hesitant rhythm I recognized immediately. I grabbed my crutches and maneuvered my way to the door, wincing as my foot grazed the floor. When I slid the deadbolt back and pulled the door open, the sight that greeted me made my chest tighten. Dante stood there looking like he had just walked out of a war zone. His mechanic jumpsuit was covered in grease stains that were darker than the fabric itself, and his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion. Standing next to him was Sarah, his fiancée, still wearing her blue hospital scrubs with her ID badge dangling from her pocket. She was clutching a plastic grocery bag in one hand and a large thermos in the other. They did not wait for an invitation. Sarah breezed past me, immediately dropping her bags on the coffee table and guiding me back to the lumpy sofa with the authority of an intensive care nurse. Sit down before you fall down, she commanded gently. Dante stepped inside and locked the door behind him, checking the deadbolt twice, as if he wanted to physically bar the rest of the world from hurting me. He looked around my cramped living room, taking in the peeling paint and the water stain on the ceiling. I saw his jaw tighten. He hated seeing me live like this. He believed the lie that I was barely scraping by, and it clearly ate him alive that he could not do more to help his big sister. Sarah wasted no time. She knelt on the floor and began unpacking her supplies. I brought the good stuff, she said, pulling out a bottle of high-grade anti-inflammatory medication and a tensor bandage. I also brought dinner. My mom made chicken soup, and I know you probably haven't eaten since you left that house. The smell of the hot broth filled the room, replacing the stale scent of the old apartment. It was simple homemade food, but in that moment it smelled better than the lobster and steak my parents were currently gorging on. As Sarah expertly wrapped my knee, reducing the throbbing pressure, Dante sat on the edge of the coffee table. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and looked at me with an intensity that broke my heart. I am so sorry, Keisha, he said, his voice rough. I should have been there. If I wasn't working these damn double shifts, I would have been at the party. I would not have let them treat you like that. I would have put you in my truck and taken you to the hospital myself. He looked down at his grease-stained hands, ashamed of his absence. I reached out and touched his shoulder, feeling the coarse fabric of his uniform. You are here now, Dante, I said softly. That is all that matters. He shook his head slowly. No, it is not. You need surgery, Keisha. Sarah told me everything. You need real help, not just soup and bandages, and I am going to make sure you get it. The determination in his eyes was terrifying because I knew exactly what he was about to do, and I knew exactly what it had cost him. Dante reached into the deep pocket of his stained coveralls and pulled out a white envelope that was slightly bent and smudged with black oil prints. He placed it on the coffee table between us. pushing it forward slowly with 2 fingers as if he were ashamed of what it contained. The paper made a soft scratching sound against the wood. I stared at it, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I know it is not much, Keisha," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared intently at a loose thread on the rug. "There is $800 in there. I know you need 6,000, but this is all I could scrape together on short notice. The shop has been really slow lately, and hours are getting cut. I am trying to sell some parts on the side, but this is everything I have liquid right now." I looked at the envelope. It was thick with small bills, likely tens and twenties. To my father, $800 was a bottle of wine or a dinner bill. To Dante, right now, it was clearly his rent money. It was his grocery money. I reached out to push it back toward him, my hand shaking. "Dante, I cannot take this. You have bills to pay. You have a wedding to fund. I will figure something else out." He shook his head vigorously, cutting me off. "No, you are taking it. I will pick up extra shifts next week. I will figure it out. You are my sister, and I am not going to let you be crippled because Dad is too busy playing captain on his imaginary boat. We take care of each other, Keisha. That is what we do." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence was broken by a soft, ragged sob. We both turned to look at Sarah. She was standing by the kitchenette with her back to us, but her shoulders were shaking violently. She turned around slowly, and her face was wet with tears. She looked from me to Dante with a mixture of anger and heartbreak that I did not understand. "Tell her, Dante," she choked out. Her voice was high and tight. "Tell her where you really got that money." Dante shot her a warning look, his eyes going wide with panic. "Sarah, stop. It does not matter. Just drop it." "It does matter," she cried out, taking a step forward. She turned to me, pointing a trembling finger at my brother. "He did not get that money from overtime, Keisha. There is no overtime. The shop is cutting hours. He sold his tools. He sold his entire Snap-on master set to his old boss this afternoon for pennies on the dollar just to get cash fast." I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt. I looked back at Dante and saw the truth written in his evasion. For a mechanic, a master tool set is not just equipment. It is their livelihood. It is their career. Those tools took him 10 years to collect. They were his ticket to opening his own shop one day. Without them, he was just a pair of hands for hire. He had literally sold his future to buy me a chance to walk. "Dante," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Please tell me you didn't." He shrugged helplessly, trying to smile through the pain in his eyes. "Tools are just metal, Keisha. You are flesh and blood. I can buy more wrenches later. I can't buy you a new knee." I looked at the crumpled envelope and then at my brother. I had spent the last 5 years hiding my wealth to protect myself from my parents' greed. But in doing so, I had blinded myself to my brother's generosity. He had stripped himself bare to save me, while believing I was destitute. This was love. This was sacrifice. And this was the moment everything changed. I knew then that I wasn't just going to pay for my surgery. I was going to give Dante the world. I looked at the dirty envelope sitting on my coffee table and then up at my brother's face. The gravity of what he had done hit me harder than the fall down the stairs. For a master mechanic, a professional tool set is not just a collection of wrenches and sockets. It is their identity. It is an investment of tens of thousands of dollars accumulated over years of hard labor. It is the only way they can command a decent wage. By selling it to a predatory boss for quick cash, he hadn't just given me money. He had cut off his own hands. He had voluntarily demoted himself from a skilled technician to an unskilled laborer just to buy me a chance to walk without pain. While my father was hoarding $45,000 for a boat he would barely use, Dante had sacrificed his entire livelihood for $800. The contrast broke me. I felt a sob rip through my chest, but it was not from despair. It was from an overwhelming sense of gratitude that washed away the bitterness of the last few hours. I pulled both Dante and Sarah into a fierce hug, ignoring the grease on his jumpsuit and the shooting pain in my leg. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the scent of motor oil and cheap soap. It was the smell of loyalty. It was the smell of real love. I held on to them tightly, realizing that while I had lost a mother and father that night, I had gained something infinitely more valuable. I had a family that would bleed for me. As I pulled away, I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. The motion was sharp and final. The sadness that had clouded my eyes for the last 5 hours evaporated instantly. In its place, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. My posture straightened. The time for crying was over. The time for hiding was over. The test I had set for my family was complete, and the results were in. My parents and sister had failed miserably, but Dante had passed with colors so flying they were blinding. I looked Dante in the eye. My expression shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the steel gaze of the CEO who negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking. My voice dropped an octave, losing the tremble of the victim. "All right, Dante," I said firmly. "The test is over. You have done enough." I reached out and closed his hand over the envelope, pushing it back toward him. "Keep this money. Buy Sarah a nice dinner. Because I promise you right now you will never have to fix a car for a minimum wage paycheck ever again. You are done being the underdog." Dante looked confused by the sudden change in my demeanor, but I didn't explain. Not yet. I reached for my purse and pulled out my encrypted black phone. I unlocked it and scrolled to a contact labeled simply The Wolf. It was my lead attorney. I looked at my brother and smiled a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Go home and get some sleep, Dante. Tomorrow, everything changes. I have a boat to sink." The morning sun filtered through the cheap blinds of my apartment, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I felt nothing but a laser-focused determination. I looked at the empty coffee cup Dante had left behind and the spot on the rug where he had sat. That stain was a monument to his loyalty and a declaration of war against everyone else. I picked up my secure phone. It was heavy in my hand like a weapon. I dialed the number for Marcus Wolf, my lead attorney, and the man who handled the dirty work for my holding company. He answered on the first ring. "Good morning, Ms. Jenkins. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call on a Saturday?" His voice was smooth like polished granite. I did not waste time with pleasantries. "I am ready to execute the acquisition strategy we discussed last year regarding the Jenkins estate." I heard the sound of typing on the other end. "You mean your parents' home? Are you sure you want to cross that line?" I took a deep breath. I was not just crossing the line, I was erasing it. "I want you to contact the lender holding the mortgage on Calvin Jenkins' property. I know for a fact he is 90 days behind. Purchase the note. Offer them full value if you have to, but I want the deed in the name of KJ Holdings by Monday morning. And there is one more thing. He just financed a $45,000 boat called the Freedom. Find the lender. Buy that debt too. I want to own every single thing he thinks defines his status." Wolf let out a low whistle. "You are going for the throat. I assume you want to serve the foreclosure notices immediately." "Not immediately," I corrected him. "I want to serve them in person. There is a launch party for the boat this Sunday. I want the paperwork ready for me to hand deliver. And Wolf, while you are at it, run a full forensic audit on Blue Sky Logistics. Specifically, look into the expense accounts of a mid-level manager named Greg Miller. I have a feeling he has been funding his wife's lifestyle with company money, and since I own 15% of that firm, I think it is time we cleaned house." "Consider it done," Ms. Jenkins Wolf said, his tone shifting from surprised to professional. "I will have the courier bring the documents to your real address tomorrow morning. Do you need security for the event on Sunday?" I thought about the way my father had physically ushered me out the door. I thought about Greg blowing smoke in my face. "Yes," I said. "Send the big guys. I want them to know exactly how small they really are." I hung up the phone and leaned back against the lumpy sofa. The pain in my leg was still there, but for the first time in days I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the hunter, who just saw the trap snap shut. By noon that Saturday, the digital ink was already dry. Marcus Wolfe did not believe in wasting time, and neither did I. I sat in my home office, watching the secure files populate on my Alienware screen one by one. The first document was a PDF of my parents' mortgage note. It had been acquired from their bank for the full remaining principal balance, plus a premium to expedite the transfer. Across the top page in bold red letters was the digital stamp that signaled their end. Sold to KJ Holdings, LLC. I now owned the roof over their heads. I owned the walls they hung their family portraits on. Next came the lien on the freedom. The brokerage firm had been all too happy to offload the high-risk loan to a private equity firm. My father thought he was the captain of his destiny, but he was sailing on a ship that I now commanded. But the most satisfying and disturbing revelation came from the forensic audit of Blue Sky Logistics. I opened the file labeled Gregory Miller Internal Review. As a major shareholder, I had access to data that would make a district attorney salivate. Greg had been living a lie that was far more dangerous than just leasing a car he could not afford. The numbers showed a pattern of irregular withdrawals disguised as vendor payments to a shell company in Nevada. Over the last 18 months, he had siphoned off nearly $200,000 in fake consulting fees. I scrolled through the credit card statements associated with the Shell account, expecting to see gambling debts or luxury purchases. What I found was far worse. The money trail did not just lead to the Range Rover in my parents' driveway. It led to rent payments for a luxury apartment complex on the north side of the city. A unit rented to a 22-year-old woman named Tiffany, who was definitely not my sister Jasmine. There were charges for jewelry dinners and weekend trips to Cabo San Lucas that coincided perfectly with the dates Greg had told Jasmine he was away at logistics conferences. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Greg wasn't just an arrogant bully. He was a thief and an adulterer. He was stealing from the company I invested in to buy gifts for my sister to keep her quiet while supporting a mistress on the side. He had stood in my parents' living room, blowing smoke in my face, acting like the model of success while standing on a foundation of fraud. I printed the bank statements, the lease agreement for Tiffany's apartment, and the internal audit report. I added them to the growing stack of evidence on my desk. They wanted a show at the boat launch tomorrow. I was going to give them a finale they would never forget. The trap was set, and it was time for the executioner to get dressed. I did not go back to the county hospital where I had sat shivering on paper sheets waiting for a doctor who was too tired to care. Instead, I arranged for a private transport to the exclusive Lakeshore Orthopedic Institute. The difference was staggering. There were no clipboards or skeptical billing coordinators asking for deposits. There was only a concierge named Stefan who took my coat and offered me a menu of organic post-operative meals. I paid for the surgery, the private suite, and the round-the-clock rehabilitation team in full before I even saw a scalpel. When I woke up from anesthesia, my knee was reconstructed not with budget hardware but with top-of-the-line titanium anchors. I spent the next 3 days in a room that looked more like a penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton than a medical facility. I had a view of the Chicago skyline and a physical therapist who came to me 3 times a day to ensure my mobility was returning without pain. But the physical repair was only half the battle. I needed to look the part of the executioner. For years I had dressed down, wearing oversized hoodies and scuffed sneakers to maintain my cover as the struggling data clerk. That disguise ended now. I called a personal shopper from Saks Fifth Avenue who arrived with a rack of clothing that screamed power. I chose a structured white pantsuit by Alexander McQueen. It was sharp-tailored and pristine, the kind of outfit that said, "I did not touch dirt, I own the land." I had my hair braided into an intricate crown revealing my face and the cold determination in my eyes. I put on diamond stud earrings that cost more than Greg's entire car. Then came the equipment. I refused to hobble into that marina on wooden crutches like a wounded animal. I ordered a custom carbon fiber electric wheelchair. It was sleek, matte black, and moved silently with the touch of a joystick. It did not look like a medical necessity. It looked like a throne. My leg was encased in a state-of-the-art robotic brace that allowed me to lock the joint for stability or unlock it for movement with a Bluetooth command from my phone. When I looked in the full-length mirror on Sunday morning, I did not recognize the woman staring back. The hunch in my shoulders from carrying the weight of my family's expectations was gone. The fear of rejection was gone. In their place stood a woman worth millions who held the deed to her abuser's home in her lap. I was no longer Keisha, the daughter who needed help. I was Ms. Jenkins, the woman who owned the bank. I spun the chair around and rolled toward the door. It was time to crash a party. My phone chimed with a notification just as I was applying the final coat of crimson lipstick. It was a text from my mother, Beatrice. I picked up the device expecting another cancellation or a warning, but what I read was somehow worse. The message was dripping with the passive-aggressive venom she had perfected over 30 years. It read simply, "We are heading to the marina for the launch of the Freedom at noon. You are welcome to stop by if you can manage to present yourself respectably. However, your father insists that there be no talk of loans or surgery costs. This is a celebration of our success, not a charity event for your failures. Do not embarrass us." I stared at the screen and felt a dry, humorless laugh bubble up in my chest. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, hours before their destruction, they were still trying to dictate the terms of my existence. They were so confident in their superiority, so secure in their delusion, that I was the anchor dragging them down. They had no idea that I was actually the ocean they were about to drown in. I typed my reply slowly, savoring every letter. "Do not worry, Mother. I will be there. And I am bringing a surprise that is going to change everything for this family." I hit send and tossed the phone onto my velvet duvet. I turned to the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger to my family. My hair was braided into an intricate regal crown. My white Alexander McQueen suit was sharp enough to cut glass tailored perfectly to fit my seated form. On my wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch worth more than my father's entire retirement fund. I transferred myself into the matte black carbon fiber wheelchair. It hummed to life with a soft futuristic whir, responding instantly to my touch. This was not a medical device. It was a chariot. I rolled over to my desk and picked up the thick leather portfolio that Marcus Wolfe had delivered earlier. It felt heavy in my lap. Inside were the foreclosure documents, the boat repossession order, and the evidence of Greg's embezzlement. This was the surprise I had promised. It was a gift of truth. I checked my reflection one last time. They were expecting the limping, begging Keisha. They were expecting a victim to kick around. What they were getting was the CEO of KJ Holdings. I rolled out of the apartment complex, where a convoy of 3 black Cadillac Escalades was waiting. These were not Ubers. This was my private security detail. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They were massive, built like linebackers with earpieces and grim expressions. They didn't ask questions. They simply loaded my chair into the back of the lead vehicle with practiced efficiency. As the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me in the quiet luxury of the leather interior, I watched the city pass by through tinted windows. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that matched the feeling in my gut. I sat back and closed my eyes, visualizing the marina, visualizing the look on Greg's face. It was showtime. As the heavy door of the Escalade clicked shut, sealing me inside a cocoon of leather, and silence, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was Dante again. I stared at his name on the screen and felt a pang of guilt. He was probably pacing the floor of his small apartment right now, terrified that his stubborn big sister was about to walk into another firing squad. I slid my thumb across the screen to answer. "Keisha, please tell me you are not actually going down there." His voice was tight with panic. "Sarah and I are getting dressed, but I have a bad feeling about this. Mom is already posting pictures of the Champagne Tower. They are in full performance mode. If you go there with your leg like that, they are just going to hide you in a corner or make jokes about you. I cannot watch them do that to you again. Please just let us come over to your place. We can order pizza and watch movies. You do not need this. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the headrest. Even now, after everything, he was trying to protect me. He was willing to skip the fancy party he was barely invited to just to make sure I didn't get my feelings hurt. He thought I was driving my old rusted sedan into a lion's den. He had no idea I was bringing the entire zoo. Dante, listen to me, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and completely unrecognizable from the crying woman he had seen 2 nights ago. I need you to trust me. I am not going there to beg for scraps. I am not going there to be their punchline. I am going there to finish what started on those stairs. There was a long silence on the other end. He heard the shift in my tone. He heard the steel. Keisha, what are you doing? He whispered. I did not answer his question directly. Instead, I gave him an order. I need you to go into your closet and take out that charcoal gray suit you bought for your engagement photos. The one you save for special occasions. Put it on. Make sure Sarah wears her favorite dress. I want you both to look like the royalty you are. Meet me at the marina entrance in 20 minutes. Do not go inside without me. But Keisha, he stammered. Trust me, Dante, I interrupted. Today we are not the poor relations. Today we are the ones holding the keys. Just be there. And Dante, keep your head up. You are never going to bow to them again. I ended the call before he could ask any more questions. I placed the phone down on the leather seat next to me and looked out the tinted window. The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. We are ready, Ms. Jenkins, he said. I nodded. Let's roll. The convoy began to move, gliding forward like a shark through dark water. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive car interior and my own expensive perfume. My brother was worried about dignity. He didn't need to be. I had brought enough dignity for both of us and enough justice to bury everyone else. The time for talking was over. The time for reckoning had arrived. The address I had texted Dante was not the marina entrance. It was a gated estate in Highland Park, the one sanctuary I had kept secret for 5 years. When the massive wrought iron security gates swung open, allowing Dante's battered pickup truck to crawl up the long paved driveway, I watched from the front portico. He parked next to the marble fountain, looking around with wide, fearful eyes, as if he were trespassing on holy ground. He stepped out in his charcoal suit, smoothing the wrinkles nervously, while Sarah stood beside him, clutching his arm in her navy dress. They looked small and terrified against the backdrop of the limestone mansion. They thought they were at the wrong house. They thought this was some kind of mistake. It was time to bring them into the fold. I rolled out of the massive double doors in my custom carbon fiber chair, the motor humming softly on the stone entryway. My security detail, 2 men the size of vending machines, flanked me on either side. Behind us, the convoy of 3 obsidian black Cadillac Escalades idled their engines, creating a low, rumbly bass note that vibrated in the air. Dante's jaw literally dropped. He blinked, looking from the mansion to the SUVs and finally to me. I was not the broken sister he had seen crying on a lumpy couch 2 nights ago. I was sitting in a throne of technology, wearing a white Alexander McQueen suit that cost more than his annual salary, my leg encased in a robotic brace that gleamed in the sunlight. Keisha, he whispered, his voice cracking. Whose house is this? What is going on? It is mine, Dante, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the driveway. It has been mine for years. Just like the garage I am going to buy for you will be yours. But right now, we have a schedule to keep. I signaled to the lead driver and the side door of the middle Escalade slid open. Marcus Wolfe was already inside, reviewing a stack of legal documents with the precision of a surgeon sharpening his scalpel. He looked up and nodded respectfully. Get in, I told them. We are burning daylight. Dante and Sarah climbed into the leather interior, moving like they were in a dream. As I rolled up the ramp and locked my chair into place opposite them, the atmosphere inside the vehicle shifted. It was not a car. It was a war room on wheels. Sarah's eyes went wide as she took in the champagne flute in the cup holder and the grim determination on my face. She looked at the legal files stamped with the KJ Holdings logo and then back at me. Keisha, she whispered, who are these people? I handed her a bottle of sparkling water. These are the people who are going to make sure no one ever looks down on you again. This is Mr. Wolf. He owns the mortgage on the house we are going to. And as of yesterday, I own the boat. The driver's voice came over the intercom. Ms. Jenkins, we are moving out. ETA to the marina is 20 minutes. I looked at Dante. He was still staring at me, but the fear in his eyes was being replaced by a dawn of realization. You did this, he asked. You did all of this. I nodded. I told you that you would never have to fix cars for pennies again. I meant it. But first we have some trash to take out. The convoy began to move, rolling down the driveway like a shark gliding through dark water. I straightened my blazer and checked my reflection in the darkened glass. The music of the engine roared beneath us, a symphony of power and retribution. Let us go make a scene. The Lakeshore Harbor Marina was buzzing with the kind of performative wealth that always made my skin crawl. It was a sea of white linen pants and oversized sunglasses, where the air smelled of salt water and expensive sunscreen. My father Calvin was standing on the upper deck of the freedom-holding court like an admiral who had just conquered a new world. He was wearing a white captain's hat that looked ridiculous on him, but none of the guests drinking his champagne dared to tell him. My mother Beatrice was flitting between groups of people showing off the teak decking and the custom white leather upholstery, acting as if she had personally laid the wood herself. From the tinted window of the Escalade, I could see Jasmine and Greg standing near the gangway, accepting congratulations for a success they had absolutely no part in building. Then the music seemed to stop. The low, guttural rumble of 3 V8 engines cut through the polite chatter of the party as our convoy turned onto the pier. We did not park in the designated visitor lot a quarter-mile away. We rolled right past the security guard who waved us through after seeing the diplomatic plates on the lead vehicle and drove directly up to the red carpet leading to my father's boat. The guests stopped talking and turned to stare. I saw Greg crane his neck trying to see who had arrived. The whispers started immediately. Is it the mayor? Is it a celebrity? The SUVs were completely blacked out, swallowing the sunlight and radiating an aura of serious, untouchable power. The lead vehicle stopped inches from the velvet rope. The doors flew open in unison and my security detail stepped out. 2 massive men in dark suits and sunglasses with earpieces scanned the crowd with professional indifference. They moved the velvet rope aside without asking for permission. The hush over the marina was absolute now. The side door of the middle Escalade slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. A motorized ramp extended smoothly to the pavement, touching down with a solid thud. I rolled out into the sunlight. I was not the crippled daughter in a dirty cast they had kicked out 3 days ago. I was a vision in white Alexander McQueen sitting in a custom carbon fiber throne that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. My hair was braided into an intricate regal crown, and the diamond studs in my ears caught the midday sun sending fractals of light dancing across the pavement. I adjusted the joystick and the chair hummed forward silently. Marcus Wolf stepped out behind me, flanking my right side like a shark in a 3-piece suit holding a leather briefcase that contained their doom. Then came Dante and Sarah, looking impeccable and terrified, but standing tall just as I had ordered. I saw the exact moment recognition hit my family. My mother dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the deck, spraying glass and sparkling wine over her shoes, but she didn't even flinch. She just stared, her eyes bulging. My father took off his hat, his mouth hanging open as he gripped the railing for support. Greg looked like he had seen a ghost, and for the first time in his life, he looked small. They didn't understand the context yet. They didn't know how I was here or why I looked like this. But they felt the shift in gravity. They knew instinctively that the dynamic had changed. I moved the joystick and glided forward, my security team parting the sea of guests. I looked up at my father on his boat, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for his approval. I was looking at my target. The stunned silence that had fallen over the marina did not last long. Denial is a powerful drug, and Greg was overdosing on it. He simply refused to believe what his eyes were seeing. In his small, predatory mind, there was only one explanation for a woman who was begging for money on Friday to be rolling up in a motorcade on Sunday. It had to be a stunt. It had to be fake. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that grated against the sophisticated atmosphere of the party. He swaggered down the gangway, his glass of scotch sloshing over the rim, stepping onto the dock with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the pavement. Well, 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 he sneered, his voice booming loud enough for the entire gathering to hear. Look at this performance. He gestured vaguely at the gleaming black SUVs and my security team. You really went all out, didn't you, Keisha? What did you do, max out another credit card to rent a limo service for the hour? This is pathetic even for you. You are trying so hard to look important that you forgot you could not even afford a bandage for your leg 2 days ago. Jasmine was right behind him, clutching her designer purse like a shield. She looked at my Alexander McQueen suit with a mixture of jealousy and confusion, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. Seriously, Keisha, she hissed, leaning over the railing. This is embarrassing. You look ridiculous. Just go home before the rental time runs out and you get stuck here. Dad is going to be furious that you are making a scene. The crowd rippled with uncomfortable whispers. They looked from Greg's flushed, angry face to my stoic expression. They were waiting for me to scream back. They were waiting for the cat fight. But I gave them nothing. I did not frown. I did not defend myself. I did not even look at Jasmine. I kept my eyes locked on Greg, watching him unravel. He was a small man, shouting at a storm, and he didn't even know it yet. I shifted my hand slightly on the armrest of my chair. It was a tiny movement. I lifted my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sound was sharp and crisp, cutting through the humid air like a gunshot. Immediately, Marcus Wolf stepped forward from my right side. He did not look at Greg. He did not acknowledge the insults. He simply placed his leather briefcase on a high cocktail table that a waiter had just vacated. The heavy click of the brass latches opening echoed on the wooden dock. He lifted the lid with precise, deliberate movements, revealing the thick stack of legal documents inside. The wind caught the corner of the top paper, fluttering the page that bore the seal of the county clerk. Greg stopped laughing. The smile slid off his face like oil. He looked at the lawyer, then at the briefcase, then at me. And in that silence, he finally realized that the predator in the room wasn't him. My father was oblivious to the standoff happening on the dock below him. He was standing at the bow of the ship holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors that glinted in the sun. He looked out at the crowd, his face flushed with champagne and ego. He cleared his throat, preparing to make the speech he had probably practiced in the mirror for weeks. I christen this vessel the Freedom, he announced, his voice booming with forced joviality. May she bring us fair winds and eternal prosperity. He never finished the sentence. 2 men wearing heavy gray jumpsuits and steel-toed boots marched up the gangway. They moved with the heavy indifference of people who ruined lives for a living. They pushed past my mother, who gasped and clutched her pearls as she stumbled back against the railing. They ignored Greg, who was still staring at me on the dock with his mouth open. They walked straight up to the gleaming white helm station and slapped a large neon orange sticker onto the pristine glass of the windshield. The sound of the adhesive hitting the glass was louder than the seagulls overhead. It read in bold black letters that were visible from 50 feet away, "Seized. Property of the lender. Do not remove." My father froze. The ceremonial scissors clattered to the deck, narrowly missing his expensive boat shoes. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" he sputtered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Get off my deck. This is a private vessel. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Do you know who I am?" One of the repo men turned around slowly. He didn't look intimidated. He looked bored. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and shoved it into my father's chest. "We are just doing our job, sir. You can take it up with the lien holder. We have orders to secure the asset for transport. Now please step away from the controls." Marcus Wolf cleared his throat from the dock. It was a polite sound, but it carried across the water like a gavel strike. "Actually, Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice projecting with practiced courtroom authority, "there is no need for the police. These gentlemen are acting on my client's direct instructions. My father looked down at the lawyer, squinting in the sunlight. Who are you? He demanded, gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. And who is your client? You have made a grave mistake. I will sue you for everything you have. Wolf adjusted his glasses and picked up a document from the open briefcase. I represent the new note holder of your liabilities. According to these records, you are 90 days delinquent on your primary residence mortgage, a mortgage that you recently leveraged as cross-collateral to secure the financing for this vessel. He looked up, his expression completely void of sympathy. The terms of the loan are clear, Mr. Jenkins. Default on the primary asset triggers an immediate call on the secondary asset. Since you have failed to cure the default on your home, we are exercising our right to accelerate the debt. The crowd was dead silent. Guests lowered their phones, but kept recording. My mother looked like she was going to faint. My father shook his head, desperate to maintain the illusion. That is impossible, he stammered, his voice trembling. I have 30 more days. The bank said I had time. I was going to move some funds around next week. Wolf shook his head, slowly closing the file with a snap. That grace period expired yesterday at midnight. As of this moment, both the house in Highland Park and this boat are the property of the creditor. You are currently trespassing on company property. I suggest you disembark immediately before we have security remove you. The humiliation was total. The freedom was not his escape. It was his cage, and I had just locked the door. My father gripped the polished teak railing so hard I thought the wood might splinter under his hands. His face had gone from a flush of embarrassment to a pale, waxen mask of pure fury. He looked like a cornered animal lashing out at the invisible walls closing in around him. He leaned over the side of the boat, spitting his words down at the lawyer. "Who is it?" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Who is trying to ruin me? I want a name. I want a name right now. I will sue them into the ground. I play golf with the district attorney. I will have your license revoked and I will burn your firm to ash." The threat hung in the humid air, heavy and pathetic. The crowd watched in stunned silence, holding their breath. Even the seagulls seemed to stop calling. Marcus Wolf did not flinch. He did not look intimidated by the man shouting from the high ground. He simply adjusted his glasses with a slow, deliberate movement that signaled total control. He looked up at my father with the expression one might use when explaining a difficult concept to a slow child. "There will be no need for lawsuits," Mr. Jenkins Wolf said, his voice calm and carrying effortlessly across the water. "And there is certainly no need to look for a mystery enemy. The creditor is not a stranger. In fact, the creditor is the only person who tried to help you when you were drowning in your own ego 5 years ago." Wolf took a step back. With a theatrical sweep of his arm, he gestured directly toward me. "Allow me to introduce the sole proprietor of KJ Holdings, the entity that now owns your mortgage, your business loans, and as of this morning, this boat, your daughter, Miss Keisha Jenkins." The world seemed to stop spinning. My father's eyes followed the lawyer's hand and landed on me. He blinked once, then twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination. He looked at the sleek black wheelchair. He looked at the 2 massive bodyguards standing like statues behind me. He looked at the white Alexander McQueen suit that gleamed in the sunlight. But mostly he looked at my eyes. He was searching for the scared little girl who had begged him for surgery money in his living room. He was searching for the victim. But she was gone. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply stared at him with the cold indifference of a banker denying a loan application. "Hello, Dad," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the dead silence of the marina, it sounded like a thunderclap. "You told me to be an adult. You told me to learn how to manage risk. You told me that the world does not owe me a safety net. You were right. So I decided to take your advice. I stopped looking for a safety net, and I bought the bank instead." My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. He looked at my mother, who was trembling beside him. He looked at Greg, who was turning a sickly shade of green. He looked back at me, and for the first time in his life, he saw me. He did not see an investment that failed. He saw the boss. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, stumbling over his own feet as the repo men finished applying the tape to his windshield. The king had fallen, and his own daughter had just taken the crown. My mother decided that reality was too expensive a price to pay, so she opted for theater instead. She let out a strangled cry, pressing the back of her hand to her forehead in a gesture straight out of a bad soap opera. Then she crumpled to the deck of the boat, collapsing into a heap of linen and fake pearls near the captain's chair. The crowd gasped collectively. Several guests rushed forward to help her, their champagne glasses forgotten on the tables. My father knelt beside her, shouting for water, trying to deflect the humiliation of the foreclosure by playing the concerned husband. I did not move. I did not gasp. I sat in my carbon fiber throne and watched the performance with the detached interest of a critic reviewing a flop. I knew my mother. I knew that she had fainted not from shock but from a desperate need to reclaim the narrative. She wanted to be the victim. She wanted the crowd to see me as the villain who had given her a heart attack. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. "Give it a rest, Mother," I said, my voice amplified slightly by the microphone system on my chair. "The paramedics will charge you $3,000 for an ambulance ride, and I know for a fact you do not have the insurance to cover it." Her eyes snapped open instantly. The miraculous recovery was almost comical. She scrambled to her feet, shoving away the guests who were trying to help her. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure venom. "How could you?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me from the deck. "We gave you life. We raised you. We put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us. By stealing our home. By humiliating your father in front of his friends. You are a monster." I rolled my chair forward, stopping right at the edge of the dock so I was looking up at her. The angle was symbolic. She was physically higher, but I held all the ground. "You are confused, Beatrice," I said, using her first name to strip away the maternal authority. "I did not steal your home. You lost it. You stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago to fund your country club dues and this boat. I simply bought the debt to save the property from going to a stranger. But let us be clear about the new arrangement." I signaled Wolf, who held up the foreclosure notice for everyone to see. "The house in Highland Park is no longer your residence. It is an asset on the balance sheet of KJ Holdings. As the new owner, I am giving you 2 options. Option 1 is that you have 30 days to vacate the premises. You will pack your things and leave the keys on the counter." My father looked like he was going to vomit. "Leave," he whispered. "But that is our home. We have lived there for 20 years. Where will we go?" "That brings me to option 2. I continued, ignoring his plea. "You can stay, but you will sign a standard 12-month lease agreement. The rent will be set at current fair market value, which for that zip code is roughly $8,500 a month. You will pay the first and last month up front, plus a security deposit. And before you ask, there is no family discount. In fact, given your credit history, I might have to ask for a guarantor." The crowd murmured. The brutality of the offer was breathtaking. I was treating my parents like high-risk tenants because that is exactly what they were. My mother burst into fresh tears, real ones this time, as the weight of her new reality crushed her. They were not just broke. They were my tenants, and I was the landlord from hell. Greg watched the destruction of my parents with a look of growing horror. But it was not the horror of a concerned son. It was the terrified calculation of a parasite realizing its host was dying. He looked at my father slumped against the railing, and then at my mother weeping on the deck. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that he was struggling to find his footing. But Greg was a man who solved problems with aggression and loud noises. When he realized he could not intimidate me, he turned his rage toward the nearest available target, which was Marcus Wolf. "You think you can just walk in here with your fake papers and scare us?" Greg shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "This is a setup. It is all a lie." He lunged forward, his hands curled into fists, aiming a wild punch at my attorney's jaw. He moved with the clumsy desperation of a man who had never been in a real fight in his life. He never made contact. Before he could even get within striking distance, one of my security guards moved with terrifying speed. He intercepted Greg mid-stride, catching his wrist and twisting it behind his back in a fluid, practiced motion. Greg yelped in pain and was slammed chest first onto the wooden planks of the dock. The sound of the impact was heavy and final. "Let him up," I said calmly, speaking into the microphone on my chair. My guard looked at me for confirmation before releasing his grip and stepping back. Greg scrambled to his feet, dusting off his expensive linen pants, his face beet red with humiliation and rage. He looked around wildly, realizing that the crowd was not on his side. They were filming him. He was the entertainment now. "You are going to regret that," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I am going to have you arrested for assault. I am a respected businessman in this city. You are nobody." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. A respected businessman. Is that what you call it? I signaled to Wolf, who reached into the briefcase one last time. He pulled out a thick blue folder and handed it to me. I held it up for Greg to see. The label on the front read, "Blue Sky Logistics Internal Audit." Greg's face went from red to a ghostly white in less than a second. He recognized the logo. He recognized the font. "You see, Greg," I said, my voice steady and sharp. "When I decided to diversify my portfolio last year, I took a particular interest in the logistics sector. I acquired a 15% stake in Blue Sky. That makes me one of the largest individual shareholders in the company you work for. And as a shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to ensure that the company's assets are protected from theft." I tossed the heavy file onto the dock. It slid across the wood and stopped at his feet, spilling open to reveal bank statements and photocopies of cashed checks. "We conducted a forensic accounting review of your department. Greg," I continued mercilessly, "we found the shell company in Nevada. We found the invoices for consulting services that were never rendered. We found the $200,000 you siphoned out of the corporate accounts over the last 18 months. You were not buying Jasmine that Range Rover with your salary. You were buying it with my money." Jasmine let out a gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. She looked at her husband with wide, horrified eyes. Greg stammered, trying to find a lie that would work. "That is not true," he stuttered. "That is a mistake. I can explain. It was a loan. I cut him off. You can explain it to the Economic Crimes Unit." As if on cue, the crowd at the end of the dock parted. Two uniformed officers and a detective in a plain suit walked toward us. They had been waiting in the wings, timed perfectly for this moment. The detective stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Gregory Miller," he said, his voice bored and professional. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Greg tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The water was behind him and the law was in front of him. He looked at Jasmine, pleading with his eyes. "Baby, call my lawyer. Call Dad. Do something." Jasmine didn't move. She was staring at the open file on the ground, specifically at a credit card statement that listed a monthly rent payment for an apartment that wasn't theirs. She saw the name Tiffany scrawled in the margin. She realized in that moment that she wasn't just broke, she was the punchline to his joke. She turned her back on him. The officers grabbed Greg's arms and spun him around. The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of karma catching up. As they marched him past me, he looked down at my wheelchair, his eyes filled with hate. I looked up at him and smiled. "Good luck in prison, Greg," I said softly. "I hear the toilet cleaning duty pays 15 cents an hour. You should be good at that." They dragged him away, leaving my family in ruins. My father was losing his boat. My mother was losing her house. My sister was losing her husband. And I sat in the center of the chaos, untouched and unbreakable. The marina was silent, except for the wind and the soft hum of my engine as I turned my chair around. The show was over. It was time to go home. The police cruiser carrying Greg disappeared around the bend of the Marina Drive, but the flashing lights seemed to leave a permanent burn mark on Jasmine's retinas. She stood motionless on the dock, clutching her designer handbag, as if it were a life preserver in the middle of the Atlantic. The guests were whispering louder now. Phones were raised, capturing every second of the Jenkins family dynasty crumbling into dust. Jasmine pulled out her phone, her thumb flying across the screen. I knew exactly what she was checking. She was checking the joint accounts. She was checking the credit limit. Her face crumpled. The screen displayed a series of red notifications. Accounts frozen. Assets seized pending investigation. She looked up at the parking lot where her Range Rover was parked. She realized with a sick jolt that the Economic Crimes Unit would be towing that away as evidence before the sun went down. She was not just the wife of a criminal. She was destitute. She spun around, wild-eyed, and looked for someone to blame. Her eyes skipped over me, sitting calm and untouchable in my chair, and landed squarely on our parents. "This is your fault," she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. She marched toward Calvin and Beatrice, who were still huddled together near the gangway of the seized boat. "You told me he was a catch. You told me to marry him. You said he had vision. You pushed me to find a man with money so I wouldn't end up like Keisha. Well, guess what? Keisha is the only one with money, and I am married to a felon." Beatrice recoiled as if slapped. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Jasmine. We only wanted the best for you. We thought he was a good match. How were we supposed to know he was a thief?" "You didn't care," Jasmine yelled, throwing her hands in the air. "You didn't care as long as he bought the expensive wine and leased the nice cars. You taught us that looking rich was more important than actually being decent. You made me treat my own sister like garbage because she didn't fit your picture of success. You poisoned us against her. And now look at her. She owns us. She literally owns the roof over your heads." Calvin stepped forward, his face purple with indignation. "That is enough, Jasmine. You are making a scene. A scene." Jasmine laughed hysterically, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Dad, your boat just got repossessed by your daughter. Your son-in-law is in handcuffs. There is no scene left to make. The show is over. We are a joke. Everyone is laughing at us. Look at them." She gestured to the crowd of former friends and business associates who were watching with morbid fascination. Not one of them stepped forward to offer comfort. They were watching a car crash. Jasmine turned back to me, her anger deflated, replaced by a terrified realization. "Keisha!" She whimpered, her voice small. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the money. I have nowhere to go. They froze the accounts. I can't go back to the apartment." I looked at my sister, the girl who had mocked my laptop, the girl who told me to sell my computer for cab fare. I felt a flicker of pity, but I smothered it instantly. Pity was what got me hurt in the first place. "You are young, Jasmine," I said, cold as ice. "And you have 2 working legs. I hear the coffee shop downtown is hiring. Maybe you can learn to make your own money for once." I turned my joystick and began to roll away, leaving them to devour each other in the ruins of their own greed. I turned my back on the screaming match that was consuming my parents and sister. Their voices faded into the background, becoming nothing more than white noise. My focus shifted entirely to the 2 people standing near the velvet rope, looking like they wanted to disappear. Dante was clutching Sarah's hand so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear, as if he no longer knew the woman sitting in the carbon fiber wheelchair. He had just watched me destroy our family in less than 10 minutes, and he was terrified that he was next. I rolled my chair forward until I was just inches away from him. The steel look in my eyes softened instantly, melting back into the warmth of the sister who used to make him peanut butter sandwiches when we were kids. "Dante," I said softly, breaking his trance. "Do not look at them. Look at me." He lowered his gaze, meeting my eyes. "Keisha," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I do not understand. You own the bank. You own everything. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know who was real," I answered. And I got my answer 3 nights ago when you put an envelope of grease-stained cash on my coffee table. You were willing to sell your soul to fix my leg while they wouldn't even skip a party. I told you that you would never work for anyone else again. I meant it. I reached into the leather side bag attached to my armrest and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. There were 12 of them jingling together, along with a remote for an industrial security gate. I held them out to him. His hands shook as he took them, the cold metal settling into his palm. "Do you know the old commercial complex in District 7? I asked. The one on the corner of Main and 4th with the red brick facade. Dante's eyes went wide. "The auto center," he whispered. "The place with 10 bays and the hydraulic lifts." I nodded. "I bought the deed this morning. It is fully stocked. Brand new snap-on tool chests in every bay. Digital diagnostic machines. A renovated waiting room for customers. It is the largest independent garage in the district. And it is yours, Dante. All of it. I put the title in your name. You are not a mechanic anymore. You are the owner." Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Dante looked from the keys to me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. But I wasn't finished. I pulled a sleek iPad from my bag and tapped the screen, waking it up. I handed it to him. "Open the banking app," I instructed. He tapped the icon with a shaking finger. The screen loaded, revealing a business checking account labeled Dante's Auto Repair. The balance stared back at him. $500,000. "That is your operating capital," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That is for payroll. That is for parts. That is for the wedding of your dreams, so you do not have to wait another 2 years to marry this amazing woman." Dante looked up, tears spilling over his lashes and tracking through the faint smudge of grease he had missed on his cheek. "Keisha," he choked out. "I can't take this. This is too much." "You can, and you will," I said, reaching out to grip his hand. "You are the only one who treated me like family when I had nothing to offer. You are the only one who saw me. This isn't charity, Dante. This is an investment in the only good man I know. Now stop crying and go start your empire." He fell to his knees, right there on the dock, ignoring his suit, ignoring the crowd, and wrapped his arms around me, burying his face in my lap. I held him tight, stroking his hair, while behind us, the rest of the Jenkins family watched in stunned silence, realizing too late that they had bet on the wrong horse. I had burned their world to the ground, but I had built a new one for the only person who deserved it. The moment I pulled my hand away from Dante's grip, the spell was broken. I had done what I came to do. I had balanced the scales. I signaled to the lead security officer, who gave a sharp nod and began to clear a path back to the waiting convoy. The crowd of onlookers parted instantly, their phones still raised, recording the final moments of the drama. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. I was no longer the disabled woman they pitied. I was a force of nature they wanted to avoid. I rolled toward the ramp of the middle escalade, the hum of my electric motor the only sound cutting through the stunned silence of the marina. But the silence did not last. As the lift began to raise me into the sanctuary of the vehicle, I heard a commotion erupt on the dock behind me. It was the sound of frantic footsteps pounding against wood and the desperate scrambling of people who realized their lifeboat was leaving without them. I turned my head slightly to see my parents pushing past the security perimeter. They had seen the keys. They had seen the iPad. They had seen the $500,000 I had just handed to the son they considered a failure. And in that moment, the realization of what they had lost hit them with the force of a freight train. They weren't running for love. They were running for the money. "Keisha, wait!" my father bellowed, his voice cracking with exertion. He was running up the pier, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, his captain's hat long gone. He looked pathetic, stumbling in his expensive boat shoes, panting for breath. My mother was right behind him, tripping in her heels, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. They looked like refugees from a disaster of their own making. They reached the side of the SUV, just as I locked my chair into place. I could have signaled the driver to pull away immediately. I could have ignored them completely. But I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear the final lie. I pressed the button on the armrest, and the tinted window slid down with a smooth mechanical whir. My father gripped the doorframe, his fingers sliding on the polished black metal. He shoved his face into the opening, desperate to make eye contact. The smell of stale champagne and fear wafted into the car. "Keisha, baby, please don't go," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "You have this all wrong. You are misunderstanding everything." I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone. "Misunderstanding what, Calvin?" I asked calmly. "That you evicted me, that you laughed at me, that you let your son-in-law blow smoke in my face." No, that was all part of the lesson," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the interior of the luxury car. "I was just trying to teach you resilience, Keisha. I was trying to push you to be your best self. Look at you now. Look at this car. Look at that suit. You stood up for yourself. You took control. Do you think you would have done any of that if I had just given you the money? I did this for you, Keisha. I was being a good father. I was using tough love to make you strong." The audacity was so breathtaking it almost impressed me. He was actually trying to take credit for my success. He was trying to frame his cruelty as a strategic parenting decision. He reached through the window trying to touch my arm. "We are family, Keisha. You can't do this to us. You can't leave us with nothing. We love you. We have always loved you more than anyone." My mother pushed in beside him, clutching at the door handle. "We were just stressed, honey," she sobbed. "The boat, the house, it was all so much pressure. We didn't mean those things we said. We are your parents. You owe us this chance to make it right." I looked at their desperate, grasping hands. I looked at the greed shining behind their tears. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a walking ATM. They saw a landlord who could evict them. I thought about the cold wind on the porch 3 nights ago. I thought about the pain in my leg as I walked to my car alone. I thought about Dante selling his tools. "You are right," I said, my voice quiet and final. "You did teach me a lesson. You taught me that the only people who deserve a seat at my table are the ones who sat with me when I was on the floor. And neither of you were there." I moved my finger to the window switch. "Keisha, wait!" my father screamed, realizing what was happening. "You can't leave us here. Everyone is watching. I love you, Dad," I said, cold as the grave. "But I need you to be an adult. I need you to figure it out." I pulled the switch. The black glass began to rise, sealing me off from their toxicity. My father tried to hold it down, but the motor was stronger than his grip. He had to snatch his fingers back to avoid them being crushed. The window sealed shut with a soft thud, muffling his screams instantly. I tapped the partition glass. "Drive," I ordered. The driver floored the accelerator. The massive V8 engine roared to life and the Escalade surged forward. I didn't look back at the marina. I didn't look back at the boat with the orange sticker or the brother-in-law in handcuffs. But as we turned the corner, I caught one last glimpse of them in the side mirror. Two small, shrinking figures standing in a cloud of dust, coughing in the exhaust of the daughter they had thrown away. I picked up my phone and opened the banking app. I had a wedding to plan for my brother. As for the rest of them, they were already in the past. The view from my corner office on the 45th floor was breathtaking. From here, Chicago looked like a circuit board of light and steel, a sprawling grid of power that I now controlled a significant piece of. The late afternoon sun bathed the room in a warm gold glow, reflecting off the glass of my mahogany desk. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the ant-like cars crawling along Lakeshore Drive. I shifted my weight from my left foot to my right. There was no pain, no throbbing, no stiffness. The titanium anchors in my knee held firm, allowing me to stand in 3-inch heels for the first time in years. The rehabilitation had been brutal but effective. I walked back to my desk with a stride that was smooth and confident, the limp nothing more than a memory buried in the past. My phone buzzed on the desktop, vibrating against the polished wood. It was the first of the month. I didn't need to look at the screen to know what the notification was, but I picked it up anyway. It was a deposit alert from my property management software. Rent payment received. Tenant, Calvin and Beatrice Jenkins. Amount $1,200. I tapped the screen to open the details. They had not stayed in the Highland Park mansion. Of course they hadn't. They couldn't afford the $8,000 lease I had offered them, and their credit was too destroyed to rent anywhere decent in the city. So they had ended up in one of the lower income units in my portfolio. It was a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a building near the airport where the roar of jet engines shook the windows every 10 minutes. It was clean and safe because I was a responsible landlord, but it was a far cry from the marble floors and high ceilings they were used to. And the irony was that they were still paying me. Every single month, they scraped together their wages to write a check to the daughter they had tried to discard. I could picture them right now. My father, Calvin, the man who used to lecture me about high finance and risk management, was currently working the checkout line at a discount grocery chain. He wore a green polyester smock that was too tight around the middle and spent 8 hours a day asking people if they wanted paper or plastic. I had sent a secret shopper to the store last week just to check on them. The report said he looked tired. It said he kept his head down, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone who might recognize the former yacht owner in the old man bagging frozen peas. My mother Beatrice was working part-time as a greeter at a big box store, standing on the concrete floor for shifts that made her ankles swell. She had sold her jewelry. She had sold the designer purses. Now she came home to a small apartment that smelled of other people's cooking and sat at a wobbly table to count out their tips. They were learning the lesson they had tried to teach me. They were learning what it actually meant to survive without a safety net. They were learning that dignity wasn't something you bought with a boat, it was something you earned with your character. I looked at the deposit notification again. It was on time. It was the exact amount. Not a penny less. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive joy. I didn't feel the urge to call them and gloat. I just felt a cold, satisfying sense of balance. The scales had been corrected. They were paying their debts literally and figuratively. I swiped the notification away, clearing the screen. On the desk next to my phone sat a framed photo of Dante and Sarah. They were standing in front of the newly renovated auto center, grinning like idiots covered in grease and confetti. The shop was fully booked for the next 3 months. They were thriving not because I gave them money, but because they had the heart to build something real with it. I smiled at the picture. That was my family, the ones who built. As for the tenants in Unit 4B near the airport, they were just business. And business was good. I turned off my screen, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the office without looking back. The prophecy Keisha had whispered on the dock had come true with terrifying accuracy. At the state correctional facility, the lights never truly turned off. They just dimmed to a sickly yellow hum that buzzed like a trapped fly inside Greg's skull. He was no longer the arrogant logistics manager who leased cars. He could not afford to impress people he did not like. He was inmate number 8,940. He was wearing a faded orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He was currently on his knees on the cold concrete floor of the communal bathroom, clutching a rough bristle brush. I hear the toilet cleaning duty pays 15 cents an hour. That is what she had said. Greg dipped the brush into the bucket of gray water and scrubbed the grout line. His hands, once manicured and soft from pushing papers, were now raw and covered in blisters. A guard walked by, tapping his baton against the bars. "Move it," Miller, the guard barked. "You missed a spot in the corner. If this isn't spotless by inspection, you lose commissary privileges for a week." Greg didn't argue. He didn't threaten to sue. He didn't mention his father-in-law or his lawyer. He just nodded, keeping his eyes on the floor, and scrubbed harder. The power he thought he had was an illusion. The money was gone. His reputation was ashes. And every time he looked into the swirling water of the toilet bowl, he saw his own reflection mocking him. He was exactly where he belonged. 30 miles away in a strip mall that had seen better days, the air was thick with the stinging scent of acetone and cheap acrylic powder. Jasmine sat on a low stool, her back aching in a way she never thought possible. She was wearing a smock that was stained with polish remover and filing the calloused heel of a woman who was loudly complaining on her cell phone. This was not the high-end spa where Jasmine used to go to gossip and drink cucumber water. This was a discount nail salon where the fluorescent lights flickered and the customers tipped in quarters, if they tipped at all. Jasmine held the woman's foot, focusing on the rough skin. She remembered how she used to make fun of Keisha for working late. She remembered calling Keisha's job boring and low class. She remembered telling her parents that Keisha was an embarrassment to the family image. The irony burned in her throat like bile. She was now the one kneeling. She was now the one serving. She was the one hoping the customer wouldn't notice her chipped polish because she couldn't afford to fix it. "Hey, watch it," the customer snapped, jerking her foot back. "You nicked me. Are you paying attention or are you stupid?" "I am so sorry," Jasmine stammered, her face flushing hot. "I will be more careful. It has been a long day. I don't care about your day." The woman huffed, rolling her eyes. "Just finish the job. I have somewhere to be." Jasmine swallowed her pride. It was a bitter pill, but she had to choke it down. She had to finish this shift because she had a baby at home. A baby that Greg would not see grow up for at least 5 years. A baby that needed formula and diapers. When the shift finally ended, Jasmine walked out into the cool evening air. She counted the crumpled bills in her pocket. $42. That was her haul for 8 hours of humiliation. It was barely enough to keep the lights on in the studio apartment she was renting above a laundromat. She walked past an electronics store window and froze. On the wall of televisions playing the evening news, she saw a familiar face. It was a segment on Chicago's rising business leaders. Keisha was on the screen, standing tall in a boardroom, pointing at a projection of a new commercial development. The caption beneath her read, "Keisha Jenkins, CEO of KJ Holdings, transforming District 7. She looked powerful. She looked radiant. She looked like a queen. Jasmine looked at her own reflection in the glass. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were tired. Her clothes were cheap. She placed her hand on the glass, touching her sister's image, and finally understood the magnitude of her mistake. She had spent her whole life looking down on the only person who could have lifted her up. Now she was on the ground, and the view from the bottom was lonely. Karma had not just knocked on her door, it had moved in. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trellis of the Chicago Botanical Gardens, turning the white roses into clouds of gold. It was the kind of light that photographers pray for, soft and forgiving. I stood at the altar, not as a guest, but as the officiant, holding a leather-bound book in my hands. My legs were strong beneath me, hidden under a flowing silk gown that moved in the gentle breeze. There was no pain today, there was only pride. I looked at Dante standing to my left. He was unrecognizable from the exhausted young man who had sat on my coffee table 6 months ago. The grease stains were gone, scrubbed away, and replaced by a custom-tailored tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. But the change was deeper than the clothes. He stood with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something real. The garage in District 7 was not just surviving, it was a local institution. He had hired 4 new mechanics to keep up with the demand, and the reviews online called him the most honest business owner in the city. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a pillar of the community. The music swelled, a string quartet playing a melody that floated on the wind. Sarah stepped onto the aisle, and the entire garden seemed to hold its breath. She was radiant. The stress lines that used to bracket her eyes from working double shifts at the hospital had smoothed out. She walked toward us with a smile that lit up the entire venue. She wasn't walking toward a struggle. She was walking toward a future that was secure and full of promise. As she reached the altar, Dante reached out and took her hand. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from overwhelming emotion. I looked at the two of them and felt a lump form in my throat. This was the investment that mattered. The stocks and the real estate portfolios were just numbers on a screen. This joy right here was the real return. I cleared my throat and looked out at the guests. There were no toxic parents in the front row. There were no jealous sisters or criminal brothers-in-law. The chairs were filled with friends, fellow mechanics from the shop, and the staff from my company. It was a gathering of the chosen family, the people who showed up when it rained. Dante looked at me, his eyes shining with tears. He gave a microscopic nod, a silent message that only I could hear. Thank you. I smiled back, letting him know that the debt was paid 1,000 times over. I began the ceremony, my voice steady and clear, projecting to the back of the garden without a microphone. We are gathered here today to celebrate loyalty, I said, looking directly at my brother. We are here to celebrate the kind of love that sacrifices without asking for a receipt. The kind of love that sells its most prized possessions just to help someone else walk. Sarah squeezed Dante's hand and he wiped a tear from his cheek. We went through the vows, the promises of forever that felt heavy and real in the evening air. When it was time for the rings, Dante's hand was steady. He slid the band onto Sarah's finger, a symbol of a circle that would never be broken. By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois and by the power of our enduring bond, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Dante pulled Sarah into a kiss that made the crowd erupt in cheers. Rose petals rained down on them, a storm of white and pink. I closed the book and stepped back, watching them laugh as they walked back down the aisle together. They were unstoppable. And as I watched them go, I knew that I had finally fixed the one thing that mattered most. My family was healed. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had chosen to build. The music from the reception hall drifted up to the stone balcony where I stood. It was a soft jazz melody that mixed with the hum of the cicadas in the surrounding gardens. Below me, the party was in full swing. I could see Dante and Sarah in the center of the dance floor, swaying slowly under the string lights. They looked like a single entity moving in perfect synchronization, oblivious to the world around them. The guests were laughing, clinking glasses, and celebrating a union built on genuine love. It was a perfect picture of happiness. I took a sip of the vintage Krug champagne in my hand and let the cold bubbles settle on my tongue. It tasted like victory. I turned away from the railing and looked out at the skyline in the distance. The city was a grid of lights glowing against the velvet darkness of the night. It was quiet up here, peaceful. In this silence, my father's voice echoed in my memory one last time. I remembered his desperate face pressed against the car window at the marina. I remembered his excuse. I was just trying to teach you resilience. I was trying to teach you to be an adult. He was a liar and a narcissist, but in a twisted, unintended way, he was right. I had learned to be an adult, but his definition of adulthood and mine were two very different things. To Calvin and Beatrice, Jenkins being an adult meant hardening your heart until it was made of stone. It meant stepping on anyone who got in your way, even your own children, to maintain a facade of success. It meant that love was transactional, a commodity to be traded for status or obedience. They thought maturity was the ability to inflict pain without feeling guilt. They thought strength was the ability to abandon people when they were no longer useful. I looked down at the scar on my knee hidden beneath the silk of my gown. I traced the line of it with my mind. They were wrong. Real maturity is not about cruelty. It is about boundaries. It is the profound realization that you are the only person responsible for your own safety and your own peace. Being an adult means recognizing that DNA is nothing more than biology. It is a random lottery of genetics, not a binding contract of servitude. Just because someone shares your blood does not mean they deserve your table. Just because someone gave you life does not mean they have the right to drain the life out of you. I had spent 25 years trying to earn their love, thinking that if I just worked harder, or achieved more, or complained less, they would finally see me. I thought that being a good daughter meant enduring their abuse with a smile. But that wasn't being a good daughter. That was being a victim. The moment I became an adult was not when I made my first million or when I bought the banknote. It was the moment I realized that no is a complete sentence. It was the moment I realized that toxic people are like cancer cells. You do not negotiate with them. You do not try to understand them. You cut them out before they kill you. I looked back down at the dance floor. Dante spun Sarah around and she threw her head back laughing. That was the legacy I wanted to build. I had used my power not to hoard wealth like my father, but to empower the people who actually mattered. I had protected Dante from the fallout of our parents' greed. I had given him the tools to build a life. That was what real power looked like. It wasn't about the boat or the mansion or the Alexander McQueen suit. It was about the ability to shield the people you love from the storm. I set my empty glass on the stone railing. The wind picked up slightly, blowing a loose strand of hair across my face. I didn't brush it away. I felt light. The crushing weight of expectation that I had carried since childhood was gone. The fear of rejection was gone. The need for their approval was dead and buried. My father wanted to teach me a lesson. He wanted me to learn that the world is a cold and unforgiving place where you have to fight to survive. He succeeded. I learned that lesson well. I learned that the world is indeed cold, which is exactly why you have to build your own fire. And if the people standing next to you try to put that fire out, you do not let them stay warm by your flames. You lock the door, you roll up the window, and you drive away. I smoothed down the front of my dress and turned back toward the double doors leading into the reception. The music was picking up tempo, shifting into something upbeat and celebratory. My brother was waiting for me. My friends were waiting for me. My life was waiting for me. I walked back inside, leaving the ghosts of my family in the dark where they belonged. I was Keisha Jenkins. I was the CEO. I was the sister. And finally, fully and completely, I was free. I stepped through the French doors and back into the warmth of the reception hall, leaving the cool night air and the memory of my parents behind me. The transition was physical. I felt the vibration of the bass in the floorboards and the hum of conversation washing over me like a tide. Immediately, the isolation of the balcony vanished. I was no longer the solitary commander looking down at her troops. I was a woman returning to her tribe. Marcus Wolfe was the first to spot me. The man who had served the foreclosure papers with the cold precision of a surgeon was now standing near the bar, loosening his silk tie. He raised his crystal tumbler in a silent salute. There was no need for words between us. He had seen the files. He knew exactly what I had survived, and he had been the sword I used to cut the infection out. In his eyes, I saw a respect that my father had never given me in 25 years. Marcus was on my payroll technically, but tonight he felt like an older brother watching out for his kin. He was family not because of lineage, but because he had stood in the line of fire for me. I moved deeper into the room, weaving through the tables. My assistant, Elena, who had helped me coordinate the secret purchase of the auto repair shop, rushed over. She was tipsy and laughing, holding her shoes in her hand. Ms. Jenkins, she beamed, grabbing my arm with a familiarity she would never have dared show in the office. "This is the best party ever. Look at them." She pointed to the mechanics from Dante's shop who were teaching the corporate lawyers from my firm how to do a line dance. It was a chaotic, beautiful collision of worlds. These were my people, the blue-collar grinders and the white-collar sharks, all united by a single thread: loyalty. They didn't care about my last name. They cared about my vision. They cared that I signed their checks on time and treated them with dignity. Then came the gravitational pull. Dante saw me from across the room. He didn't wave. He didn't wait. He abandoned his conversation and walked straight toward me, cutting through the crowd. Sarah was right beside him. They didn't look at me as the wealthy benefactor who had funded their lives. They looked at me as the keystone of their arch. Dante wrapped his arms around me, lifting me slightly off the ground, his strength controlled and gentle. "I got you, sis," he whispered into my hair. "I always got you." Sarah joined in, hugging us both, creating a tight protective circle. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of their joy. And in that embrace, the final revelation hit me with the clarity of a diamond. For years, I had been mourning the loss of a family that never really existed. I had cried over a mother who saw me as a burden and a father who saw me as an investment failure. I had let the biology of our shared DNA chain me to their abuse, thinking that blood was a binding contract. I had believed the lie that you cannot choose who you belong to. But standing there, sandwiched between a mechanic and a nurse surrounded by lawyers and assistants, I realized how wrong I had been. Family is not the blood that runs through your veins. That is just biology. That is just an accident of birth. Real family is the behavior of the people standing next to you when the sky falls. Family are the people who do not flinch when you are ugly or broken or poor. Family are the ones who answer the phone at 2 a.m. I thought back to that night on the stairs. I remembered the sharp agony of my knee twisting, the cold hardness of the wood hitting my face, and the sound of my father telling me to stop making a scene. I remembered lying there alone at the bottom of the steps, waiting for help that never came. That was the DNA family. They were the ones who pushed me. But then I looked at Dante. I thought about him sitting in my shabby apartment with grease on his face, offering me his last $800. I thought about Marcus fighting for my dignity on the dock. I thought about Sarah wrapping my knee with gentle hands. These were the people who picked me up. I pulled back from the hug, wiping a happy tear from my cheek. The scar on my knee would always be there, a permanent reminder of the people who hurt me, but the strength in my legs that came from the people who healed me. I looked at Dante and smiled, the truest smile I had worn in years. I am okay, I said, and I meant it. I am exactly where I am supposed to be. He grinned and grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the dance floor. Come on, Keisha. They are playing our song. I let him lead me into the center of the light, surrounded by the faces of the people I had chosen and the people who had chosen me back. I wasn't falling anymore. I was flying. And for the first time in my life, I knew I would never hit the ground again. The scene shifts one last time, dissolving from the golden light of the wedding reception, back to the quiet intimacy of my living room. I am sitting on the sofa, but it is not the lumpy stained couch where I cried over a broken leg and a broken heart. It is a plush velvet sectional in my penthouse overlooking the city. I am wearing comfortable silk loungewear, my hair down and my face relaxed. The storm is over. The war is won. I lean forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and look directly into the camera lens, breaking the fourth wall. I am not talking to the characters in my story anymore. I am talking to you. It has been a long journey from that cold staircase to this warm room. When I started this story, I told you about a girl who just wanted to be loved by the people who were supposed to protect her. I told you about a girl who thought that if she just gave enough money or took enough abuse, she could buy her way into their hearts. But you saw what happened. You saw the truth. The check cleared, but the love never came. I know there are people watching this right now who feel exactly the way I felt that night on the porch. You are holding on to toxic relationships because you are afraid of being alone. You are letting family members drain your bank account and your spirit because you have been taught that blood is thicker than water. You are terrified that if you say no, if you set a boundary, if you cut them off, you will be the villain in their story. Let me tell you something. I wish someone had told me 5 years ago. Let them make you the villain. Let them tell their version of the story where you are the selfish one. Let them post their angry status updates and play the victim. Because while they are busy talking about you, you will be busy building a life that is actually worth living. You will be busy healing. You will be busy finding the people who love you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. I lost a mother and a father and a sister. That is a tragedy, and I grieved for them. But look at what I gained. I gained my dignity. I gained my freedom. I gained a brother who would walk through fire for me. I gained a career that empowers me. The math is simple. Math is I traded 3 parasites for a life of peace. That is the best deal I have ever made. So here is my question for you. Who is the Calvin in your life? Who is the Greg? Who is the person making you feel small so they can feel big? And more importantly, do you have the courage to cut the cord? It is terrifying, I know. It feels like jumping off a cliff, but I promise you if you jump, you might just find out that you can fly. I want to hear your story. Are you struggling with a toxic family? Have you already walked away and found your own peace? Go down to the comments section right now and tell me, share your truth. Let us build a community here where we support each other because clearly we cannot rely on the people we were born with. I will be reading every single comment because your stories matter to me. If my story gave you even a little bit of strength today, please hit that like button. It helps get this message out to other survivors who need to hear it. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because we are just getting started. We have a lot more truth to tell and a lot more winning to do. I lean back into the cushions, a genuine smile spreading across my face. It is not the polite smile of a good daughter. It is the victorious smile of a free woman. I look at the camera one last time, my eyes bright with defiance and joy. Remember, you are the CEO of your own life. Do not let anyone else sit in your chair. The screen fades to black, leaving only the image of that triumphant smile burned into the darkness. The most powerful lesson from Keisha's journey is that family is defined by loyalty, not biology. Sharing DNA is merely an accident of birth, but showing up for someone in their darkest hour is a deliberate choice. Keisha taught us that true maturity isn't about enduring abuse to keep the peace. It is about having the courage to sever the ties that strangle you. We must realize that no is a complete sentence, and that we are not required to light ourselves on fire to keep toxic people warm. Your dignity is worth more than their approval. If this story empowered you to set your own boundaries, hit that subscribe button and share your own journey in the comments below.